Usually when we talk about building muscle or developing a new physical skill, there's this heavy expectation of just grueling intensity.
Right. Like no pain, no gain.
Exactly. You step into a gym, you lift the heaviest weights possible until you reach total exhaustion. And the prevailing logic is that, well, it's all about maximum exertion. You have to tear the muscle down completely just to build it back up.
Yeah, and it creates this deeply ingrained mindset that if you aren't completely drained, dripping with sweat or just totally mentally exhausted, you simply aren't making progress.
And we take that exact same logic, that punishing, almost puritanical approach to physical fitness, and we just apply it directly to learning a new language.
We absolutely do. It's a huge trap.
Right. We convince ourselves that to reach fluency, we need these massive, exhausting, 4-hour weekend cram sessions. We think we have to lock ourselves in a room with a giant textbook until our eyes bleed.
Which is just, it's so incredibly counterproductive, because when you step into the actual science of neurodevelopment and linguistic habit building, that whole no pain, no gain model completely falls apart.
It just doesn't work for the brain.
Not at all. We're looking at a learning landscape today that is all about micro movements. It's about neuromuscular coordination, consistency over intensity, and building daily pathways.
So it requires a total paradigm shift.
Exactly. Fluency isn't a race to perfection where you just power through the pain. It's a journey of daily, low-stakes connection. I mean, you are literally rewiring your brain and training the actual muscles in your face.
Wow. Yeah.
And you just can't force that kind of biological adaptation through weekend binge sessions. It has to be consistent.
So that is our exact mission for today's deep dive. We are throwing out that traditional, grueling classroom study model entirely.
Good riddance.
Yeah, seriously. Instead, we're taking the most cutting-edge insights from cognitive psychology, pedagogical research, and the latest 2026 AI language tools. We have a massive stack of sources today.
We really do. Some incredible stuff in there.
And we are distilling all of it down into a custom-tailored 30-minute daily practice schedule just for you. We're going to show you exactly how to bypass your anxiety, physically build muscle memory in your mouth, and, systematically fast-track your English fluency 30 minutes at a time.
We are building an architecture for daily advancement here, because the human brain is optimized for small, strategic, daily micro-engagements.
Right.
But before we get into the actual schedule, before we start blocking out exactly what you should do with every 5-minute window, we have to clear the psychological roadblocks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because you can have the most scientifically optimized 30-minute schedule in the world, but if you freeze up every time you try to speak, it's useless.
It's completely useless, yeah.
There are these massive psychological barriers that prevent adult learners from even opening their mouths in the first place.
Precisely. And in the realm of linguistics, there is a concept known as the affective filter. And if we don't address it right now, the rest of this system just won't work.
The affective filter.
Yeah. It is essentially an invisible psychological wall. It's constructed out of anxiety, a lack of self-confidence, a fear of judgment, and just a deep dread of making mistakes.
That sounds like a clinical term for pure, unadulterated panic.
That's a great way to put it.
Like when someone stops you on the street to ask for directions in the language you're trying to learn, and your stomach just immediately drops into your shoes.
Oh, it is a profound physical stress response.
Yeah.
When that affective filter is high, your amygdala, which is the brain's threat detection center, it literally hijacks your cognitive resources.
Wait, it hijacks them?
Completely. It physically blocks the language acquisition areas of your brain from processing input or producing output. Your mind goes blank, your hands sweat, your heart races.
I've felt that exact feeling.
Right. You might know the vocabulary perfectly well in a calm setting, like in your living room, but in that moment of panic, you couldn't access the word for hello if your life depended on it.
It's the freeze response. And what really triggers that freeze response for adults, far more than it does for children, is this intense fear that everyone is watching and judging us.
Yes.
There's actually a psychological phenomenon tied directly to this from our sources called the spotlight effect.
The spotlight effect is fascinating, and it is the ultimate enemy of language learning.
Tell us about it.
Well, it's the deeply convincing, yet entirely false, internal belief that native speakers are scrutinizing every single grammatical error you make.
Okay, so give me a real-world example of that.
Sure. You walk into a coffee shop to order a cappuccino in English, and you feel like there's this massive theatrical spotlight illuminating you. You think the barista and everyone in line behind you is hyper-focused on your accent, and they're silently grading your use of the present perfect continuous tense.
But, I mean, if we're being completely honest here, aren't they judging just a little bit? When you hear someone struggle with your native language, you do notice it.
You notice the effort, sure, but the critical difference is intent. In reality, most people are focused purely on the content of your message. The barista just wants to know if you want oat milk or regular milk so they can keep the line moving.
They don't care about your prepositions.
They really don't. They aren't running a mental red pen over your syntax. The fear of being judged is an internal mental barrier. It is not a reflection of objective reality.
That's a huge relief.
It should be. In fact, most native speakers generally admire the immense courage it takes to communicate in a second language because they know how difficult it is.
You know, it reminds me of learning to ride a bike.
Oh, yeah.
When you first learn to ride a bike, you expect to wobble. You fully expect to fall off and scrape your knee. That's just universally accepted as part of the process. You would never yell at a beginner for wobbling on a bicycle.
Right.
So why do we, as adults, hold ourselves to this impossible standard of flawless, native-level grammar on day one?
That is a phenomenal analogy. We expect children to wobble, but as adults, our egos are incredibly fragile.
They really are.
We are used to being competent, articulate professionals in our native language. So to suddenly be reduced to the linguistic capacity of a toddler, it is profoundly humbling.
It's embarrassing.
It feels embarrassing, yeah. But this is exactly where the mindset shift has to happen. We have to completely reframe how we view mistakes. Mistakes are not failures of intelligence. They are your greatest allies. They're actually a biological necessity.
Right, because without the mistake, your brain never gets the feedback signal that it needs to course correct.
Exactly. When you make a mistake and are corrected, or even when you just realize the mistake yourself later, your brain flags that neural pathway for revision.
Like it puts a little sticky note on it.
Exactly. But if you never speak out of fear of making a mistake, that revision never happens. The ultimate goal is clear communication, not perfect grammar, and certainly not total accent elimination.
Wait, let's talk about that for a second. The idea of eliminating an accent feels like this really toxic goal that so many learners obsess over.
Total accent elimination is largely a myth. Unless you are a professional actor spending thousands of hours with a dialect coach for a very specific role.
Right.
And more importantly, it's just unnecessary. Everyone has an accent. Someone from London has an accent to someone from Texas.
That's true.
The realistic goal should be accent reduction for the sake of clarity. You want to smooth out the phones that make your speech difficult to understand? Sure. But the accent itself is just an acoustic signature of your history.
I love that. An acoustic signature of your history.
Yeah. The focus must always remain on efficiently getting your message across, not sounding like a local news anchor.
What about personality types, though? Because when you look at traditional language learning advice, it feels heavily skewed toward extroverts.
Oh,
The advice is always, go to a loud language exchange party, talk to 100 strangers, make small talk with everyone you meet. For an introvert, that doesn't lower the effective filter, that cranks it up to a 10.
It sounds like an absolute nightmare for an introvert, and the science strongly pushes back against that extrovert-centric model.
Really?
Yeah, there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what introversion actually is. Being an introvert doesn't necessarily mean you are painfully shy or antisocial. It just means you draw energy from within, and you need time to recharge after highly stimulating social encounters.
Okay, so you might prefer deep, meaningful one-on-one conversations over frantic, loud small talk.
Exactly.
Which means an introvert's natural tendencies could actually be an advantage.
Huge advantages.
Yeah.
Introverts possess incredible superpowers for language acquisition. They tend to be deep thinkers, keen observers, and highly active listeners.
Oh, because they're not just waiting for their turn to speak.
Right. Because they aren't rushing to fill every silence with chatter, they spend more time analyzing the structure of the language they are hearing.
So you don't have to become the life of the party to learn English.
You do not need to change your core personality to become fluent. You don't have to force yourself into exhausting group environments. You can leverage one-on-one tutoring, targeted online communities, or even deep solitary practice routines to achieve the exact same fluency.
But regardless of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, how do we practically switch off that loud internal critic? Because, knowing the spotlight effect is fake on an intellectual level doesn't magically stop your hands from sweating when it's time to actually speak.
It doesn't. And that requires the development of a psychological trait called tolerance for ambiguity.
Tolerance for ambiguity.
Yes. Real progress only happens when you actively accept confusion. You have to willingly walk into situations knowing you won't understand 40% of what is being said, and you have to be okay with that discomfort.
That sounds tough.
It is. When you speak, you might feel like a blunt instrument instead of the sharp, witty person you are in your native tongue.
You just have to sit in the awkwardness. You have to let go of the need to be the smartest person in the room.
Exactly. Tolerance for ambiguity means replacing the internal panic of, I have no idea what's happening, with the calm curiosity of, I am figuring this out context clue by context clue.
I like that.
It's a shift from fear-based perfectionism to a mindset of fearless self-expression.
Okay, so we've lowered the affective filter. We've accepted that we are going to wobble on the bike, scrape our linguistic knees, and probably look a bit foolish.
Yep.
We've embraced the ambiguity. Now that the fear is managed, how do we optimally structure the actual learning? Because earlier, we definitively threw out the idea of the 3-hour weekend cram session.
Right, that's gone.
So if we aren't doing that, what does the science actually point to?
This is where we arrive at the neurobiological imperative of the 30-minute daily schedule. The human brain optimizes linguistic retention, the actual storing and retrieving of new words and grammar through regular low-intensity activation.
Let's really break that down. Because if I'm a busy professional, I might think, I don't have 30 minutes every single day, but I have a wide open Sunday afternoon. I'll just give it 3 solid hours on Sunday.
Yeah, people do that all the time.
Why does 30 minutes a day absolutely crush 3 hours on a Sunday?
It all comes down to the mechanics of memory, specifically a concept formulated by a psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus. It's called the forgetting curve.
The forgetting curve.
Yeah. Ebbinghaus demonstrated that whenever you acquire new linguistic data, your brain begins to lose it at an exponential rate, unless it is reactivated within very specific temporal windows.
So if I spend my 3-hour Sunday session learning like 40 new vocabulary words, by Wednesday, what has happened?
By Wednesday, your brain has essentially thrown the vast majority of those words in the neurological trash.
Just deleted them.
Exactly. The brain is an incredibly ruthless, highly efficient energy manager. Keeping neural pathways open requires metabolic energy. If your brain doesn't receive a signal that a specific piece of information is critical for your daily survival or functioning, it initiates a process called synaptic pruning.
Synaptic pruning.
It literally cuts the connections to save energy.
It's like a path through a dense jungle.
Yeah.
If you walk down a specific path through the jungle every single day, the brush gets cleared away, the dirt gets packed down, and eventually it becomes a wide, incredibly fast road.
That's exactly it.
But if you only walk that path once a week, the jungle is going to grow back over it almost immediately. You're constantly fighting through the vines every time you visit.
That is exactly what happens on a synaptic level in your brain. Daily practice acts as that daily walk down the jungle path. It is a constant watering mechanism. By touching the language every single day, even just for 30 minutes, you are sending a relentless, undeniable signal to your brain.
Like, hey, don't delete this.
Yes, this information is vital. I use this every day. Do not prune this pathway. That consistency is what moves the language from short-term working memory into permanent, long-term cognitive storage.
And practically speaking, keeping it to just 30 minutes completely neutralizes that affective filter we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
Because a 3-hour study session is incredibly intimidating. It's easy to procrastinate on, but anyone can find 30 minutes. You can do it on your lunch break.
Exactly. It lowers the barrier to entry so much that consistency becomes nearly effortless.
Yeah.
But there is a catch.
There's always a catch.
Because you only have 30 minutes, you cannot afford to wander aimlessly. Those 30 minutes have to be ruthlessly focused.
Which means we need goals. But not just any goals. Our sources talk about SMART goals.
Yeah.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Vague goals lead to linguistic stagnation. The most common goal I see is, I want to be fluent in English.
Which sounds great, but it's a terrible goal.
It's terrible. Because fluency is a mirage. It's a constantly moving target.
Yeah.
You never wake up one day and suddenly receive a certificate from the universe saying you are perfectly fluent.
Right.
Even native speakers don't know every word in their own language. If your goal is just fluency, you will constantly feel like you are failing.
Let's role play this for a second. What does a bad goal look like versus a SMART goal for our listener?
A bad goal is, I'm going to improve my business English.
Yeah.
A SMART goal is, I will learn and practice 5 new industry-specific phrases this week so that I can clearly present my project timeline in the Friday afternoon team meeting without relying on notes.
Oh, wow. That completely changes the dynamic.
It does.
It's specific 5 phrases for a project timeline. It's measurable. Did I use them in the meeting or not? It's achievable. 5 phrases in a week is very doable within a 30-minute daily schedule. It's highly relevant to your actual career.
Yeah.
And it's time-bound. It has to be done by Friday.
And when you structure your learning that way, every 30-minute session has an immediate, real-world payoff. You feel the victory on Friday, which releases dopamine, which in turn reinforces the habit loop for the next week.
I love that. But I do have to push back on the timeline here just a bit. If you are only dedicating 30 minutes a day to active learning, won't it take decades to reach a high level of proficiency?
Well,
Honestly, shouldn't you just pack up your life, move to London or New York, and force yourself into total immersion if you actually want to get good at this?
moving abroad is the romanticized ideal, but it's just not an option for everyone. And surprisingly, it is not strictly necessary for high-level fluency.
Wait, really?
Really. In fact, many people move abroad and end up in expat bubbles, never learning the language anyway. What this highly focused 30-minute daily routine does is anchor what we call a transnational environment.
A transnational environment. Explain that.
You are intentionally building a digital and psychological immersion bubble right where you currently live. You change your smartphone and laptop operating systems to English. You consume your news in English. You watch Netflix with English subtitles or no subtitles at all.
Changing the language on your phone is such a great, subtle trick.
It really is. You start narrating your daily chores in your head in English. You passively surround yourself with the language all day long. But that passive exposure isn't enough on its own.
Right, because you need the active work to actually encode it.
Precisely. The passive immersion prepares the soil, but the 30-minute active schedule plants the seeds. When you pair constant low-level environmental immersion with a highly focused, non-negotiable 30-minute daily practice block, you are effectively living in English, regardless of your physical geography.
Okay, the foundation is completely set. Let's get into the actual architecture. Let's officially build this 30-minute block for the listener, minute by minute.
Let's do it.
We begin the session with the input phase. This is about feeding your brain the raw, authentic data it needs to start recognizing patterns naturally. We are allocating the first 10 minutes for this, 5 minutes of reading and 5 minutes of listening.
So let's start with the 5-minute reading block. A highly effective method here is to read news headlines and short articles daily. We're talking about taking 5 minutes to scan the homepage of the BBC, NPR, or whatever outlet aligns with your interests.
Why headlines and news blurbs? Why not just sit down and read 5 minutes of a dense classic novel like Shakespeare or Hemingway? Wouldn't that expose you to, better English?
A classic novel is a beautiful piece of art, but it's often a terrible tool for practical language acquisition.
Oh, interesting.
The vocabulary is often archaic, the sentence structures are overly complex, and it requires a massive cognitive load just to decode a single page. News headlines, on the other hand, are specifically designed by editors to be punchy, highly relevant, and built using the most current, active vocabulary.
And there's a psychological hook too, right? You naturally want to know what's happening in the world.
Exactly. It leverages your existing curiosity. Scanning headlines builds a rock-solid habit because it provides a quick dopamine hit of new information. It keeps you aware of global events, which instantly gives you cultural currency.
Cultural cops.
Topics you can actually talk about with native speakers later. And fundamentally, it guarantees that your eyes trace over written English syntax every single day.
There's another fascinating strategy for this reading block mentioned in our materials.
Yeah.
Reading texts that you already understand.
Yes.
That sounds completely counterintuitive. The instinct is that you should always be pushing yourself to read the hardest possible text you can find to maximize learning.
It's a very common trap. Learners will pick up an advanced academic paper, spend 20 minutes looking up every third word in a dictionary, and end the session exhausted, having comprehended almost nothing.
Yeah, that sounds miserable.
It is. But imagine you take an article about a topic you are already a professional expert in, say graphic design or mechanical engineering, or you read a short story you already read in your native language yesterday.
You already know the plot. You already know the concepts.
Because the overarching context is already securely mapped in your brain, your cognitive resources are entirely freed up. You aren't desperately fighting to decode the meaning of the narrative.
Oh, that makes sense.
Instead, your brain can relax and observe the architecture of the language. You start noticing the prepositions. You notice how the writer transitioned between paragraphs. You absorb the grammatical structures effortlessly because you aren't stuck in survival mode trying to look up vocabulary.
That makes so much sense. It shifts you from decoding the what to observing the how.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's the first 5 minutes, highly relevant, context-rich reading. We follow that immediately with the 5-minute listening exercise. And here we have to draw a massive line in the sand between passive listening and active listening.
This is a trap almost every learner falls into at some point. We think that having an English radio station playing softly in the background while we answer emails, or having an English podcast on while we commute and space out, counts as our study time.
It feels productive. You're technically hearing English.
It is passive listening. And while passive listening is great for familiarizing your ear with the general prosody and melody of the language, it will not drive rapid linguistic improvement.
Because your brain is just ignoring it.
Your brain is fantastic at tuning out steady background noise. Active listening, which is what we need for this 5-minute block, demands your undivided, intense cognitive attention.
So if I'm doing the dishes and I put on an English podcast, can that be active listening, or do I need to sit in a quiet room with my eyes closed?
If you are scrubbing a dish but your mental focus is entirely locked onto the words, visualizing the conversation and actively parsing the sentences, it can work. But true active listening often requires halting all other heavy cognitive tasks. One of the most powerful methodologies for this is TPRS.
TPRS, teaching proficiency through reading and storytelling.
That's the one.
Let's walk through how a learner actually executes a 5-minute TPRS-style listening session.
First, you find a short audio clip, maybe a 2-minute anecdote or a news brief. You listen to it the first time without reading anything, purely focusing on the general flow. This is called top-down listening. You are just trying to grasp the emotional tone and the big picture context. Don't panic about the words you miss.
You're just trying to figure out, like, is this a happy story about a dog or a serious report about the economy?
Right. Then you briefly review any key vocabulary you might have missed. Then you listen to the exact same audio a second time. This time, because you have the top-down context, your brain starts filling in the blanks.
Okay.
Finally, you listen a third time while simultaneously reading the transcript.
So you're tying the auditory sound to the visual spelling.
Exactly. It is an active, multi-layered engagement that forces your brain to aggressively map the audio signals to actual meaning.
There's another technique for this block called close listening, spelled C-L-O-Z-E. How does that differ?
Close listening is a phenomenal auditory workout. You use software or an app that plays a sentence, but one or two critical words are blanked out with a beep. You have to actively fill in the blank based purely on the auditory context and grammar surrounding the gap.
So if the audio says, because it was raining heavily, she forgot to grab her beep before leaving the house.
Exactly. Your brain has to instantly process the context, rain, leaving the house, and the grammar. It needs a noun. You instantly hypothesize umbrella or raincoat.
Oh, that's clever.
It vastly improves your auditory processing speed because it forces you to anticipate the natural flow of the language rather than just passively letting the sound wash over you.
Okay, we're 10 minutes into the schedule. We've taken the language in, 5 minutes of strategic reading, 5 minutes of highly active listening. We've primed the brain.
Now comes the fun part.
Right. Now we have to flip the switch and physically produce the language. And this is where this deep dive gets intensely physical, because speaking a second language isn't just a mental exercise. It requires entirely new neuromuscular coordination. Which brings us to the next 10-minute block, the magic of shadowing.
Shadowing is arguably the most critical and transformative technique in this entire 30-minute framework. It was heavily popularized by the American polyglot Alexander Arguez. Shadowing, sometimes called echoing, is the immediate, near simultaneous repetition of a native speaker's audio. You are acting as their vocal shadow.
I really want to emphasize the physical aspect of this. Yeah. I've read accounts from native Spanish speakers, for instance, who say that when they first start seriously practicing English pronunciation, their jaws and cheeks physically ache after 10 minutes.
Yeah, they absolutely should. Every language has a different mouth feel. It requires distinct muscular tensions, different jaw drop distances, and entirely different tongue placements.
Right.
English, for example, is heavily aspirated and requires wider diphthong glides compared to many Romance languages. To produce phones that do not exist in your native language, you are literally training muscles in your face, lips, tongue, and throat that have been dormant your entire life. It is physical conditioning.
So let's give the listener the exact step-by-step blueprint for this 10-minute shadowing block. How do they actually do it?
Step 1. Select a short, high-quality audio clip of a native speaker whose accent you want to acquire. This is phonetic modeling. Whether you want a sharp British accent, a relaxed Californian accent, or an Australian lilt, you need a clear, consistent target.
Step 2. Don't speak yet. Just actively listen to the prosody.
Prosody is the music of the language. Listen to the melody, the pitch variations where their voice rises at the end of a clause where it drops, the length of their pauses.
Step 3. Read the transcript.
You must bridge the visual and auditory gap. Ensure you actually comprehend what is being said. If you shadow audio you don't understand, you are just making noise. Your brain needs to connect the physical sound you are producing to a conceptual meaning.
Step 4. Chunking. You pause the audio after each sentence and repeat it 3 to 5 times.
This is where the heavy lifting happens. This is the muscle memory building phase. You aren't just saying the words, you are trying to perfectly, obsessively match the native speaker's intonation, their stress points, their emotional energy.
And finally, step 5, the actual shadow. You play the audio and you speak simultaneously with the speaker, lagging maybe a fraction of a second behind.
Real-time echoing. This forces fluidity and pacing. When you shadow in real time, you are entirely bypassing the part of your brain that wants to pause and translate from your native language. You don't have time to translate. You're just riding the wave of the native speaker's rhythm.
I can see how that forces speed, but I have to play devil's advocate here. Isn't shadowing just mindlessly parroting someone else?
That's a common concern, yeah.
If I spend 10 minutes a day just repeating a podcast host's words, how does that actually help me formulate my own original thoughts when I'm in a real conversation later? I mean, I can't just walk around a networking event repeating what other people say.
That is the most common critique of shadowing, and it misses the fundamental mechanism of the exercise entirely. The key distinction is intention. Shadowing is not mindless parroting. It is hyper-intentional mechanical practice.
Okay, explain that difference.
Native speakers do not speak word by word. They link sounds together, they drop trailing consonants, they blend vowels. Shadowing trains the physical, mechanical fluidity of connected speech.
It reminds me of practicing scales on a piano.
That is the perfect metaphor. When you sit down to perform a jazz concert, you don't just play scales up and down the keyboard, but you spent hundreds of hours practicing those scales so that your fingers know exactly how to move, exactly how far to stretch without you ever having to look at the keys. Shadowing is practicing your linguistic scales. It ensures that later, when you actually need to formulate a complex, original thought in a business meeting, your mouth already knows how to effortlessly produce the required sounds. It removes the physical friction from speaking, so your brain can focus entirely on the ideas.
Okay, the picture is really coming together. We are 20 minutes deep into our daily schedule, 10 minutes of input priming, 10 minutes of highly physical shadowing. Your mouth is literally warmed up, the muscles are firing. Now, for the final 10 minutes, it's time to transition from someone else's words to your own.
Exactly.
We are moving into low-pressure output and flashcards. We divide this into 2 5-minute blocks. Let's start with the 5-minute speaking exercise.
This is about low-pressure conversation practice. And one of the most remarkably effective ways to do this, which often sounds completely ridiculous to beginners, is talking to yourself in the mirror or doing what linguists call a 60-second update.
A 60-second update. Explain what that looks like in the kitchen.
You simply narrate your immediate reality out loud. You're making breakfast, and you say, I am opening the fridge. I'm taking out 2 eggs. The pan is getting hot. I need to find the spatula. You describe your environment, your actions, or your plans for the day, purely in English.
I have to ask, standing in front of a bathroom mirror talking to yourself or whispering to yourself while cooking eggs, isn't that going to make you feel completely crazy?
It feels incredibly awkward the first 3 times you do it. But the psychological brilliance of mirror talk or self-narration is that it drops the affective filter we discussed earlier to absolute 0.
Because there is literally no audience. There is no one there to judge your grammar or sneer at your accent.
Exactly. But here is the neurobiological trick. Even though there is no audience, you are still actively engaging the speech production centers of your frontal lobe. You are practicing the incredibly complex cognitive task of retrieving vocabulary and assembling syntax in real time, but you're doing it in a completely threat-free, biologically safe environment. This safely bridges the massive gap between having passive knowledge of a language and being able to spontaneously use it in the real world.
It also forces you to confront the translation lag. When I first started learning Spanish, if I saw a dog, my brain would think the English word dog. Then I would have to mentally search a spreadsheet for the Spanish translation perro, and then I would finally speak it.
Yes, the mental spreadsheet.
That mental spreadsheet lookup creates a huge, awkward delay in conversation.
That translation lag is the death of fluency. By narrating your physical life directly in English, I'm cracking the egg, you are forcing your brain to bypass your native language entirely. You are building a direct, high-speed neural pathway between the visual stimulus of the egg and the English vocabulary word. You eliminate the translation middleman.
That is incredibly powerful. 5 minutes of safe, spontaneous narration. Which brings us to the final 5 minutes of our daily 30-minute schedule, the vocabulary block. A dedicated, highly efficient sprint for reviewing new words. And we are not talking about reading down a static list in a notebook.
No, static lists are highly inefficient. This block relies entirely on digital flashcards powered by spaced repetition algorithms. Apps like Anki or Quizlet are the gold standard here.
Let's connect that back to the forgetting curve from earlier. How does the algorithm actually beat the curve?
The algorithm tracks your memory decay. If you learn a new word today and tell the app it was easy, the algorithm knows you are likely to forget it in about 3 days. So it hides the card and shows it to you exactly 3 days from now, right at the precipice of forgetting.
Right before it falls out of your brain.
Exactly. When you successfully recall it then, the pathway strengthens, and the app won't show it to you again for a week, then a month. It optimizes the timing so you never waste a single second reviewing a word you already confidently know.
But there's a trap here too. I've seen people download massive pre-made flashcard decks of like the 10,000 most common English words, and they spend their time memorizing words like tractor or thimble when they live in an apartment and work in finance.
It is a massive waste of cognitive energy. You must curate your deck to focus exclusively on active vocabulary.
Active vocabulary.
Yes. Active vocabulary consists of the words you actually need to navigate your specific daily life. A software engineer needs an entirely different lexicon than an emergency room nurse. If you are never going to use the word thimble in your native language, do not waste precious synaptic energy memorizing it in English.
And beyond just picking the right words, how you put them on the flashcard matters. The most effective strategy is called sentence mining.
Sentence mining is a complete game changer. Instead of putting a single, isolated word on a flashcard like the word tonight, you put an entire, highly useful phrase on the card. Tonight, I'm going to the store.
Why does the whole phrase work better than the single word?
Because it drastically reduces your cognitive load during real-time conversation. When you learn isolated words, speaking requires you to frantically retrieve 5 different words, remember the grammar rules for the tense, figure out the correct prepositions, and glue them all together on the fly.
Which is when you start stuttering.
Right. It causes stuttering and hesitation. But if you have mined and memorized whole, structurally perfect sentences, you don't have to build the phrase from scratch. You just retrieve the entire pre-built chunk from your memory and deploy it instantly.
It's like buying a pre-assembled piece of furniture versus trying to build it from raw lumber while someone is staring at you.
Exactly. It creates an illusion of massive fluency because your delivery is instant and grammatically flawless.
Okay, let's take a breath and recap the 30-minute architecture we've just built. 5 minutes of input, reading, scanning, highly relevant news headlines. 5 minutes of active, intensely focused listening, like TPRS or close exercises.
Right.
10 minutes of physical shadowing to build the neuromuscular pathways for connected speech. 5 minutes of low-pressure mirror speaking to kill the translation lag. And 5 minutes of spaced repetition flashcards focusing entirely on sentence mining.
It is a perfectly balanced, neurobiologically optimized daily diet for language acquisition.
But there is one glaring vulnerability in this system. If I am doing all of this independently in my apartment for 30 minutes a day, how do I actually know I'm getting better?
That's a great point.
How do I know I'm not just shadowing incorrectly and heavily reinforcing bad pronunciation habits for 10 minutes every day? I need objective feedback. Which brings us to the final crucial component, supercharging the schedule with feedback, tech, and AI integration.
Objective feedback is the missing link for the independent learner. And before we even get to the advanced AI, the most vital, immediate tool you have is already in your pocket, your smartphone's basic voice recorder.
I'm going to stop you right there because I know exactly what everyone listening is thinking. Everyone absolutely hates hearing their own voice played back to them. It is a universally painful experience.
It is painful, but there is a fascinating biological reason for that discomfort. It's an acoustic phenomenon called internal voice bias, driven by bone conduction.
Bone conduction.
Yeah, when you speak, you don't just hear the sound traveling through the air into your ears. You are simultaneously hearing the deep, low-frequency vibrations conducting directly through the bones of your skull and jaw. This bone conduction makes your voice sound richer, deeper, and more resonant to you than it does to anyone else.
So the voice I hear in my head is a lie.
Essentially, yes. When you listen to a recording, you strip away the bone conduction. You are suddenly hearing your voice purely through the air, exactly how the rest of the world hears it. It sounds jarring, higher-pitched, and alien.
It's the worst.
It is, but you have to push through that psychological discomfort because the recording doesn't lie. Self-recording allows you to step outside your ego and objectively analyze your own speech.
Okay, so when I force myself to listen to that recording, what exactly am I analyzing? I mean, I'm not a linguist.
You are listening for three specific things. First, pace. Are you rushing and blurring your words together because you're nervous? Second, emotional tonality. Do you sound flat and monotone, which is very common when you're concentrating too hard on grammar?
And the third.
Third, filler words. The ums, likes, and you knows. When you are speaking, your brain completely filters those out. You have no idea you're doing it. But on a recording, they're glaringly obvious. Recording yourself systematically turns you from a harsh self-critic into an objective self-coach.
That covers pace and filler words, but what if I genuinely can't catch my own specific pronunciation errors? What if I literally cannot hear the difference between a long E and a short I? Because that distinction doesn't exist in my native language.
This is where the landscape of learning has fundamentally changed. We are operating in 2026. Generative AI is no longer a fun party trick or a basic translation bot. It has evolved into a highly specialized, deeply patient language coach.
The evolution of specialized AI speaking apps over the last few years is staggering. We are looking at tools like Speakerly, LLSA Speak, and Duolingo Max. These platforms are light years beyond basic voice recognition. They provide granular, phone-level acoustic feedback.
Yes.
Plain phone-level feedback for us.
It means the AI doesn't just say, you pronounced that sentence wrong. It listens to you speak a complex word, analyzes the audio waveform against thousands of native speaker models, and highlights the exact syllable, the exact vowel sound, where your tongue was in the wrong position.
That is incredible. And apps like Speakerly take that data and create dynamic workouts, right?
Yes, it utilizes mistake-driven drills. If Speakerly notices that you consistently struggle with the th sound, it doesn't waste your time giving you exercises on words you already pronounce perfectly. It immediately generates a custom mini drill packed with V words, forcing you to practice exactly where your weakness lies. It is hyper-efficient.
And if you want to move beyond pronunciation drills into actual spontaneous conversation, we now have seamless voice modes on massive LLMs like ChatGPT. But the trick here is prompt engineering. You can't just open the app and say, hey, teach me some English.
No, if you ask a vague question, you get a vague, unhelpful response. You have to explicitly engineer the prompt to construct an interactive, high-value feedback loop. You assign the AI a persona, a scenario, and a strict rule structure.
Give me an example of the perfect prompt for our listener to use tonight.
You open the voice mode and say, I want to practice my professional English. I want you to act as a senior corporate recruiter at a tech company, and you are interviewing me for a project management position. Ask me realistic interview questions one by one. Wait for my complete spoken response before moving to the next question. Do not correct me during the flow of the conversation. But when the interview is finished, provide a detailed breakdown of my spoken grammar errors and suggest more natural professional vocabulary I could have used.
You just built a custom, highly stressful, real-world scenario, but you execute it in a totally safe environment.
And you execute it with an entity that has infinite patience. The AI does not judge you. It doesn't get annoyed if you stumble over the same word 5 times. It doesn't look at its watch.
That's amazing.
It completely shatters the effective filter, providing a 24/7 space where you are totally free to fail aggressively and learn from those failures without any social consequences.
I see the massive utility in that, but I have to challenge this whole ecosystem we've built. If our entire 30-minute schedule consists of reading digital news, listening to recorded podcasts, shadowing pre-recorded audio, talking to ourselves in the bathroom mirror, and role-playing with artificial intelligence, aren't we entirely removing the human connection?
That's a fair question.
Because language evolved over millennia for one single purpose: human-to-human interaction. Are we just locking ourselves in isolated digital bubbles to achieve some sterile, robotic fluency?
It is a vital philosophical question, and the answer is how we conceptualize the role of the AI and the solo practice. The AI, the mirror talk, the shadowing, none of that is the final destination. You have to think of this 30-minute block purely as your practice engine.
The practice engine. I like that distinction.
The practice engine is where you do the messy, awkward, repetitive mechanical work. It's where you build your vocabulary, drill your neuromuscular coordination, and safely make your most embarrassing mistakes. It isolates the mechanics from the anxiety. But the practice engine only exists to prepare you for the transfer engine.
And the transfer engine is the real world.
Exactly. The transfer engine is genuine human interaction. It's using language exchange apps like Tandem, jumping into voice channels on Discord communities related to your hobbies, or walking into a local English-speaking meetup.
Right.
Because you have diligently put in your daily 30 minutes in the practice engine, when you finally step into that human interaction, your muscle memory is primed. The vocabulary is deeply encoded via spaced repetition. As a result, your anxiety is incredibly low, and you can focus entirely on the beautiful, messy reality of connecting with another human being, rather than silently panicking over which verb tense to use.
The practice engine fuels the transfer engine. That completely reorients the purpose of the solo work. You aren't replacing humans with AI, you are utilizing AI to ensure your human interactions are vastly more meaningful, confident, and fluent.
It's a holistic ecosystem. Consistency in the practice engine guarantees confidence in the transfer engine.
Well, we promised a custom-tailored blueprint to bypass the exhaustion of traditional study, and the architecture is officially complete. You now possess the ultimate 30-minute daily schedule to fast-track your fluency.
It is the ultimate testament to consistency over intensity.
Let's do one final rapid-fire recap so it's completely locked in. You trigger the routine with 5 minutes of input reading, scanning highly relevant news headlines or familiar texts to analyze syntax without vocabulary strain. You follow that with 5 minutes of active, undivided listening using TPRS or close exercises to rapidly boost your auditory processing speed.
Then you dive into the physical core. 10 intensive minutes of shadowing, intentionally echoing a native speaker's prosody to forge that vital neuromuscular coordination in your jaw and tongue, mastering the rhythm of connected speech.
You transition into 5 minutes of low-pressure output, talking to yourself in the mirror or doing a 60-second out-loud narration of your life to obliterate the translation lag and practice spontaneous thought in a zero-judgment zone.
And you cap it off with 5 minutes of hyper-efficient vocabulary review using spaced repetition flashcards, focusing relentlessly on sentence mining and active vocabulary that matters to your actual life.
All of this is supercharged by the willingness to objectively record yourself and utilizing AI as your personal, tireless practice engine.
And tying it all together is the foundational mindset shift. Your mistakes are biological necessities, your accent is just a signature of your history, and your ultimate goal is fearless self-expression.
This protocol isn't about stepping into a linguistic gym and lifting the heaviest textbook until your brain breaks. It's about showing up every single day, walking that jungle path, executing the targeted micro-movements, and letting the immense power of your own neurobiology do the heavy lifting for you.
The neurobiology doesn't lie. If you commit to this daily 30-minute habit, the fluency is inevitable.
Before we sign off today, there is one final, incredibly profound idea from the research that we wanted to leave you with. It's something to really mull over as you start implementing this new 30-minute habit tomorrow morning.
Yes, we spent a lot of time talking about language as a mechanical tool for communication, but there is a well-established linguistic concept, often tied to the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, that suggests language doesn't just passively describe the world around us, it actually shapes how we perceive reality.
The words we have access to literally frame the thoughts we are capable of having.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every language carries its own unique cultural DNA. It has its own specific cadence of humor, its own historical idioms, its own distinct way of structuring logic and emphasizing time or emotion. As you engage in this daily schedule, as you shadow those rhythms, as you absorb those new phrases, you aren't just memorizing a new phonetic code to order coffee. You are actively carving out an entirely new bilingual identity.
It's an expansion of the self. So the ultimate question to leave you with is this. If the language you speak shapes the thoughts you have, and the thoughts you have shape the reality you experience, who will you become when you finally start thinking in English effortlessly?
It is a profound psychological transformation. You aren't just learning words. You are mapping a new cognitive landscape.
And it turns out you don't need the exhausting, heavy lifting, no pain, no gain approach to build that incredible new identity. You don't need to move to London. You just need 30 minutes, a smartphone, a bathroom mirror, and the courage to let yourself wobble on the bike while your mouth learns some new muscle memory.